right. Well, hi, everybody. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. My name is Caitlin Looney. I'm a licensed independent social worker with a supervisor designation. I'm also the Deputy Director of Justice Services for the Franklin County Office of Justice Policy and Programs. We operate several programs as well as administer quite a bit of grant funding here in Franklin County across many of the justice intercepts. And I'll let Morgan introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Brown. I'm also a licensed social worker, and I've been with OJPP, which is the Office of Justice Policy and Programs, since about 2018. And I serve as the site coordinator of Safer Station. I supervise the multidisciplinary team that we have here.
Thanks, Morgan. And so before we launch into a lot of the different slides and things like that, I just wanted to let you know that when it comes to the content, everything I did try to get uploaded into the website, including all of the research and a few reference documents that we use here. So you should have those available to you as well as the PowerPoint. And Morgan and I always like to tell people we're not necessarily subject matter experts in everything all the time. Honestly, for a lot of the things that we are going to talk about today, she and I just kind of naturally did as social workers because of the core values and principles that are kind of were, seeped into our head over our years of education and experience. Um, and so if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat or, we'll leave some time at the end for some questions as well. That is us. We both do work under the umbrella of the Office of Justice Policy and Programs. That is a Board of Commissioner agency, so we are considered a government entity. And let's dive in. We wanted to level set just a little bit with some terminology, not take anything for granted, and make sure everybody knew what we would be discussing today, understanding different language and some differences in language. So to start off, the acronym LGBTQIA+, we wanted to make sure that everyone had the basic understanding of what this acronym typically stands for. And what I say typically stands for is you have to understand that, like so often in language, culture, geography can change things. And so when it comes to LGBTQIA, that represents most often lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and then the plus. The plus is trying to encompass all of the other identities that aren't necessarily included in this acronym. And something that we hear often is, why does it keep changing? I can't keep up. And it's really important to understand that this acronym has grown and evolved over time as we gain more freedom to learn and understand ourselves, as well as express ourselves, accept ourselves, and find more acceptance in our culture and our community. The LGBTQIA plus population has had significant oppression, discrimination for decades and decades and decades. So a lot of this is new and evolving and different conversation. And so what you will see throughout this presentation is we even do switch up the acronym just a little bit. And that is based on the research that was used and the acronym that they utilized to represent the population that they focused on in their research. And so one thing that we always say is if you're unsure of what acronym to use or how to express something, just default to what that person, that reference, that resource has identified themselves. So that way you're not found guessing. Um, Part of our level set, we wanted to introduce you to the genderbread person. If you have never seen this before, this is age old. I mean, this has been around for a while. It was in one of my very first trainings years and years ago with exposure about gender identity. And we want to talk about the different layers of identity and what it represents. You can Google the genderbread person and find a ton of different images if you find this useful to explain and have conversations amongst your teams or in your community. So starting at the top of the genderbread person is identity. So that can be gender identity, sexual identity, but identity, and that is how we think about ourselves, how we identify ourselves in our brain. how what we know to be true about ourselves. And at the bottom of this particular version of the genderbread person, you can see that a lot of times we operate in a binary system. So under gender identity, consider like a spectrum of, if you had to put 0 to 10 on femininity, masculinity, things of that nature, it does not mean that a person has to be a woman or a man, but that scale just helps try to build this idea of it's a spectrum. There is no one way, there is no one identity, there is nothing that is certain to anybody on the outside, unless it's certain to the person on the inside. And as we go down, there's attraction. So that is the heart. That can be sexual attraction as well as romantic attraction. And there's a couple of great videos online on YouTube as well that kind of go through with different examples of how to discuss attraction. But you can have sexual attraction as well as romantic attraction, and that happens in your heart. And then we have at the bottom part of the genderbread person that is where sexual reproductive organs are identified as male, female, or intersex. If you're unfamiliar with intersex, it is where a person can be born with reproductive organs, components, chromosomes, parts that are typically assigned male or female. And so we think it's really important. The intersex population faces a lot of discrimination and has been through a lot, especially in the medical community when it comes to receiving fair treatment. And then the little dotted line that goes around our genderbread person is expression. So that could be gender expression, sexual expression. It is kind of how you express yourself to the world, from your haircut to the clothes you wear, the pitch of your voice, if you choose to wear makeup or not, if you choose to have jewelry or not, and tattoos, that is all form of expression. So every single one of us has a gender identity. We have sexual attraction, romantic attraction. We have our organs that we were born with for sexual reproduction, and we have our expression. So as we go through the different slides today, we just wanted to level set that these are some of the terminology that you may hear, and of course, answer any questions that you have. Again, we're not necessarily experts on all things, but we will do the best we can and point you to any resources that may better assist you if we're unable to. So why is this important to deflection? I mean, I think that is a very easy question to answer for any type of presentation that the ECHO team has. But when it comes to deflection, I know that so many of us are passionate about better serving our community and better representing our community. And so when we look at some of the data about the impact substance use has in our LGBTQIA plus population, the overarching theme you're going to see here is that they are at higher risk to utilize substances and a few other things that we'll get to here in a minute. So deflection teams don't necessarily always have to be deflection using, substance use or focusing on substance use, right? But that is fairly common for our deflection teams across Ohio. And so if this population is going to be potentially coming to us at a higher rate, we need to make sure that we have a couple tools in our toolbox, make sure that we can best receive them. So SAMHSA actually did some fantastic research in this area. And that research, the data brief I did include in the uploads. And I just chose a few of the slides to demonstrate this concept because it's very, very rich data brief. So from that research, SAMHSA found that sexual minority adults were at least twice as likely as straight adults to have misused any central nervous system stimulants, so cocaine, prescription, methamphetamine, in the past year. Roughly similar patterns held for each individual stimulant. So there wasn't a lot of variation between cocaine, methamphetamine, or prescription stimulants, other than sexual minority adults were twice as likely as straight adults to have used them. And when it comes to opioid misuse, one of the data points that they discovered is that bisexual females were almost twice as likely as lesbian females and more than 3 times as likely as straight females to have misused opioids in the last year. And bisexual males were about twice as likely as straight males to have misused opioids in the past year. Now, all of us in the work that we do understand the increased risk of a lot of individuals who are using opioids right now, or even those who are using stimulants, because of how fentanyl is basically integrated in so many of our substances. We know that a lot of individuals who may use substances that are stimulants or may just use recreationally, try things out for the first time, may not know and understand that fentanyl is in that product. So with these populations, we see an increased utilization of the substances, which puts them at an increased risk for, of course, overdose, whether it's fatal or non-fatal. It also creates a lot of opportunity. I think you should look at this slide for harm reduction, education, and information specific to our LGBTQIA plus population to make sure they have equitable access to harm reduction tools. And then the misuse of prescription tranquilizers or sedatives. And in this study, I believe this was defined as these weren't prescriptions that an individual picked up from the pharmacy. It wasn't something prescribed to them. It was something they received from somebody else. That sexual minority adults were more likely than straight adults to have misused prescription tranquilizers or sedatives in the past year. And this is similar to another graph that I didn't pull out of there for hallucinogen use. So the prevalence for sexual minority adults was roughly twice as high as for straight adults. So again, these are just a few snippets. The data brief also includes information on alcohol, marijuana, like this references hallucinogens. And what I want you to hear and understand more than anything is, yes, this population is at higher risk of having utilized a substance. Now, just like any other population, if they are LGBTQIA plus, that does not necessarily mean they have done this or that they will do this. It's just an increase in risk. And so when we talk about characteristics of LGBTQ individuals entering treatment, Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation actually did some fantastic research into this. They found that LGBTQ individuals had significantly higher incidences of stressful childhood experiences, school victimization, neighborhood level hate crimes, and family conflict within the previous 30 days. Like we said at the beginning of this presentation, these are members of our community that have faced oppression and discrimination for a very, very long time. And even if we would like to say that that is not the case in today's day and age, it is absolutely not the case and is often at the forefront of politics and political pressure and a lot of legislation right now. And so all those stressors that we mentioned, we all know, I think on this call, put an increased risk on the individual to have substance use, right? Again, it's not necessarily 100% causation. If an individual has these, it does not necessarily mean they will use substances, but they are absolutely at increased risk. So it could explain why we see higher incidence of use in our LGBTQ population. For those who are seeking treatment, the research found that LGBTQ individuals are more likely to be dual diagnosed. And as a deflection team, it's really important to know and understand that. So we're asking questions up front about whether or not a provider can handle or treat dual diagnosis. Sometimes a provider is set up so that way they can do both and everything's great. Sometimes they are not. And so with anybody that we're working with in our community, having that kind of directory of treatment providers that will work with dual diagnosis, any stipulations, any eligibility criteria that they have, having that upfront can be a tool for the entire community. Our LGBTQ population seeking treatment is also unfortunately 2 to 3 times more likely to report suicidal ideation or attempts. And there's a great website that we're going to link here in a little bit from this presentation where you can go to find out more about crisis resources and how to approach crisis. But the likelihood to report suicidal ideation or attempts, I'm hopeful that a lot of teams have some type of screening for suicidal ideation in their intake paperwork or at least in their conversation. And if you don't, this is a very good reminder to have it for the entire community. And this is one more reason why, so we can better support our LGBTQ individuals. These individuals also have significantly higher rate of seeking treatment for substance use and mental health than heterosexual individuals. So again, we may see actually more individuals who identify as LGBTQ than identify as straight or heterosexual or in the binary system. So we need to absolutely make sure, and Morgan's going to touch on it here, I believe, next, just even a couple basic things that we can do as human beings to make sure that we are meeting people where they are. What we also need to understand, though, is this same study did a survey of treatment providers. And out of 854 treatment programs that claimed to have specialized services for LGBTQ, when follow-up phone calls were done by the researchers, only 7.3% of those 854 treatment programs actually had a specialized program. So if you're working with treatment providers and treatment partners, it's not even just basing things off of the website. It's doing some follow-up calls to ask some hard questions, get better information about those programs to make sure that they actually have what they say that they have. And this is where Morgan's going to take over for a moment.
Thank you, Caitlin, for level setting and just stating all those facts and stats. So I'm going to be discussing how this looks on the day-to-day, then practice. And I also want to note that all of these practices and processes can and should be used universally when it comes to different populations. And just like the slide says, don't overcomplicate it. Also understand that this is coming from two social workers who took months to decide what paint we wanted to put on these walls. And we still went with white and black for some of these walls. But we did that with a purpose because we knew we had to be intentional about the space because we're not treatment and we didn't want it to feel like treatment or look like a treatment center. We want the space to be made for conversation, safety, and growth. So when we talk about being intentional, it's because representation matters. We firmly believe that unless you feel comfortable in the space and you see yourself represented and you see yourself represented in that space, you're not going to feel fully comfortable enough to open up. And if you can't really open up, that can be really hard when you're trying to make a decision to go to treatment and you're working with someone who you're trying to let into your life. So I'm kind of going to jump around on this slide, but I'll make sure I hit all of the points. One of the first things that we did when laying the foundation of this program was we put together a diverse team of experts with various subject matter expertise to form our advisory board. We have a couple of first responders and one member who was at one point in time the sitting president for Stonewall. He leaned heavily on our advisory board for even to chime in on the paint colors, to come in, take a walkthrough, to look at our signage, to make sure that we had training material that was appropriate for our staff, to make sure we knew what resources to look for, and we still rely on them to this day. Much like our advisory board, we knew that staffing needed to be diverse and reflecting of the population that we were serving. And since the goal is to serve all people, we wanted to hire qualified individuals of various backgrounds, ages, and identities. To that same token, allyship is important. We strive to show our allyship through wearing pins and buttons on our lanyards, on our badges, having items in the office for clients and treatment providers that they can take back with them, making sure our marketing material is reflective of the populations that we're serving. And more importantly, we want to show allyship and conversation. So some of us may introduce ourselves with our pronouns, like, hi, my name is Morgan Brown. My pronouns are she, her, hers. What are your pronouns? And then asking what other pronouns are too. Another part of this conversation piece is understanding that this population, much like Caitlin explained earlier, has been overlooked in silence. So when there is a moment to stand up and provide education, we want to take it. But this does come with a caveat. If you are not in a place that you think you can identify as an ally, or you have questions, or you may be someone on a learning journey and just not sure that you can have conversations around identity and gender identity, sexual identity, and expression, that is okay too. We are not here to judge you, but we are here to set the expectation that you will come into this space and be kind to everyone and treat everyone with dignity and respect. One thing that we foster in this program is also an each one, teach one model. I'm going to share a little story about one of my peers. I know she won't mind because I shared this before. One of my peers is of the older generation, and she comes from a culture where they didn't really know much about the LGBTQIA population, and it wasn't really talked about. So when she came into this space, she absolutely wanted to help. She wanted to understand what it meant to be an ally. And she knew that she had to do some work. So she came to me and said, Morgan, I want to understand. I just don't. Where can I start? So I gave her some resources. Then I also asked if she would mind taking the time out to not only learn for herself, but then also bring it back to the team. Because I'm sure there were other people on our team who still had questions and wanted to learn more. And because we want to foster a space where we can all learn and grow together, she did just that. And she did a cute presentation on just what the letter stood for, how someone can express themselves, and then what we can do as an ally. And so she now identifies as an ally. So I thought that was cute to share. So yes, being intentional absolutely means having the right people in the right space, focusing on the paint colors and decorations. But even more so, being intentional about be intentional about letting the client tell you who they are and creating as many opportunities to do so. And also letting that client show up as their full self. On the next slide, I'll go over some of our paperwork where we can do this at. But lastly, I did want to focus on the importance of making time to go into these treatment spaces to look at the decorations, meet the staff, determine how you feel when you're there, because we don't want to send anyone somewhere where they may be faced with discrimination or they may not feel comfortable. We also want to ask the hard questions up front. How, if a person identifies this way, how does that look for their rooming situation? How are the restrooms? If someone's on medication, can they take it there? We want to make sure that when a person is doing their screening, they're not feeling the disheartening feeling of we can't accept you because X, Y, and Z. They want to weed out those programs in advance before we offer them to a person. All right, you can jump to the next slide, Caitlin. All right, so these are some of the forms that we use every day. The building occupancy log is what we use every single day. I sign into it, all my staff signs into it every day. And then anyone coming to the program, we say, hey, do you mind if we sign you in? That gives us a chance to let them tell us who they're going to be that day, and we follow suit. And then after we get them fully signed in, we can start doing a little bit more digging and say, hey, do you mind if we sit down with you to complete our initial contact form? And that's where we go a little deeper. We ask about their pronouns, their gender identity, how they identify sexually. And again, we're letting them tell us that. And you'll see a business card there. We put our pronouns on our business cards. You can go to the next slide. Oh, you can jump to the next slide, Caitlin. All right. And this is just some of our signage, our posting, and our white walls. That's the front door. That's what you see when you walk in. Even when the door is shut, that's what you'll first see. The she, her fan, that's in my office. This restroom is for everyone. Just please wash your hands. And throughout the halls, we have language about diversity, equity, inclusion. We have different languages for the various language speaking. I cannot talk today. The different, goodness, people who speak different languages. And we want you to feel a sense of belonging. So each room is filled with art. It's filled with comfort. We actually have different coloring books around the office for when we're doing screenings. If someone just feels kind of uncomfortable, if they're not really good at kind of making eye contact, if doing this is hard, so we try to make it easier on the person. So anything that we can do to make that person feel comfortable, that's what we do. So don't overcomplicate it. Do what you would want done to you. And that is my piece.
Thanks, Morgan. And we're going to be finishing up here soon, leave time for lots of discussion, conversation. But so what can specialized programming look like? So this was from the Hazel and Betty Ford research as well, where they actually interviewed alumni of substance use treatment programs who identified as lesbian, gay, or transgender. And so they said three very simple, basic things. Having a separate unit or facility welcoming to sexual minorities and LGBTQ allies, safe and supportive treatment, including LGBTQ and or affirming staff, specialized treatment modalities for different substances and or addictions. And knowing some of the individuals on this call, I think these are all things that we would all want to have. And if we were making a really big decision on like today's the day I'm going to go to treatment, or today's the day that I'm going to finally ask you for Narcan or a fentanyl test strip, or today's the day I'm going to finally talk to your peer supporter or, whoever's in charge of your team. And I'm going to make this big, huge decision today. And I'm going to trust you with it, that we would all want to feel welcomed, that we would all want to feel safe and supported, and that we would all want to make sure that our needs were met, regardless of the substance use or addiction or whatever we have going on that is being asked of us. And so, like Morgan said, it's not just having the decorations, it's also making sure we have the representation amongst our teams. That's why it was on the slide 3 times. Representation matters. And so, what you might be thinking to yourself is, okay, well, how do we build that representation in our community without singling individuals out or making them uncomfortable? And so, something else that I linked with the content is actually a pretty great guide that was put together by the Department of Justice about recruitment and hiring in the 21st century. Now, it is geared towards law enforcement, but it's pretty universal in the approach. And it is as initial first step as having your flyers, your marketing material representative, maybe with the same-sex couples, having the LGBTQIA plus flag on it. But if you're going to do those things, just like Morgan said, you have to be doing that background work as well, right? It's not just to bring people in to make sure that we represent our community. It's to making sure that our team, our culture is also accepting and that it's a safe place for all of those individuals to be. And here's my favorite thing in the world to just tell people is regardless of what you are doing in life, just remember, what would Mr. Rogers do? And with a lot of the law enforcement that we work with, I work in corrections a ton. Um, Morgan said we're social workers. So like this is for us, this is like hooray, we love talking about this. I know a lot of our correction staff, sometimes even our law enforcement staff, don't necessarily have, 5 to 6 years of education and training to have these conversations. But anytime I say, well, what would Mr. Rogers do? You can't help but smile just a little bit because Mr. Rogers was all about kindness, treating each individual as an individual, that they are special, that they are unique, that they deserve good things, that you respect them, that dignity and worth that we all have as human beings is basically what Mr. Rogers stood for. So if you find yourself in a situation and you're not sure how to navigate a conversation or bring a conversation up with your deflection team about some changes that might need to be made, what would Mr. Rogers do and how would Mr. Rogers approach it? I wanted to also link some free resources. These are 100% free, and these are a gold mine for you and your organizations. So SAMHSA's LGBTQ plus behavioral health equity center of excellence is chef's kiss perfect. Online self-paced training modules that include beginner, moderate, and more advanced levels of knowledge when it comes to LGBTQ plus. They have monthly webinars, so many resources, tip sheets, briefs, technical assistance, and they also have something called the Affirm model, which you can apply to become a site to be trained and receive free technical assistance to adopt the Affirm intervention to, better meet our LGBTQ neighbors where they are. And then if you work more with youth, the Trevor Project is hands down, in my opinion, one of the best resources available to at least start your knowledge journey and have a few resources in your back pocket for youth because they have a 24/7 crisis service with online chat, calling, as well as texting. They do advocacy, research, peer support, and public education. So a lot of what these two bring are research based. And by research, yes, they've done studies, but they are also in tune and talking with the population and have representation in the research that they are doing. And with that, Morgan and I will be quiet for a few minutes, of course, open it up to any questions, conversations, or throw it back to the host team.